Reality is back under control. Let's mop up this challenge and see if cyanide in your mustard has to be lethal. This is the second part of this tiny challenge. If you have not seen part 1, it does not really matter. All you need to know is that it resulted in these 3 Warp Coven sorcerers. But if you want to find out why they look as they do and why my colors are quite limited, it's all in there. As this challenge originates from Ben and Rhys challenge, there will once more be links to the machine guns to chew on in the description. So let's pick up at the finished conversions, looking like this. I feel pretty happy with those, even if it really made me want to do more, especially of the inventive stuff, like the Birdman. But now they need some colors. At this stage I chickened out a bit and I added black and white ink as well, but I guess that's not really cheating. After a basic priming of black, they all get a zenithalish top-down coat of that grey. The grey color is kind of broken and it's pretty dreadful even after a long vicious shake. But it is the grey I got. I don't know if this counts as a messy dry brush or an intentionally sloppy undercoat, but I suppose there is a proper fancy name for it as well. I find myself doing this quite often as I don't own an airbrush. Then they all got a dry brush with the same grey, diluted with some white ink, which kind of made it even worse with consistency and application. Next up is of course to apply the main colors. I have to keep in mind that I cannot do this too neat, as it would certainly ruin the coherence with the rest of the models. So by and large it's painting all the armor in the blue color and all the details in the yellow color, with a bit of metal in between. But by only applying a thin coat, it does get some help from the zenithal. And by making a really bad job with the shoulder pads, it kind of looks like the speckled pattern from the Birdman and White Dwarf. I didn't want the cloak to be the same as the armor, but at the same time I didn't want it to be all yellow. So I added quite a lot of white ink in there to make it a bit brighter. But I also found out that as soon as the quality of the light drops, it pretty much makes no difference. I did have that Nightshade and Raglan Flesh, and they had to stand in as actual colors, and it helped out a bit. But in general it's plain yellow and blue. That might be something you fancy, but I think they look rather terrible. You might also have noticed that some of the flames have gotten a bit of a framing. It was an attempt to make the flames blend into the base a bit, because straight on these transitions look kind of worse than ugly. The idea was to make that magic thing look like it was breaking up the surface, as it's originating from, well, somewhere down below. I used almost stale bits of green stuff, but it was a bit harder than I thought, and the outcome certainly doesn't look organic. I'm not quite sure it helped, but now it's there. But luckily I found a loophole. As I have blue and yellow, it means I also have green. And while I want to keep the marini bits close to the original, the birder bits and the magic flames are pretty much open for ideas. As long as they don't look too fancy, that is. I don't want a flat looking model with advanced flames, because I believe it would just look out of place. In general I think it was a good move, and it does make quite a big difference, especially the halfway Birdman has improved. It kind of looks like the transition is an ongoing thing. I believe it's kind of hard to talk about right and wrong when it comes to a rabid halfway bird goat man with 3 arms stuck in a malicious black hole 40,000 years into an imaginary future. But under the circumstances I think it worked out quite well. And speaking of working out well, I do own a few Citadel paints, but I rarely use them. A lot of people complain about the bottles, and I must say that scoping up my colors to my wet palette for mixing is an annoying extra step that often makes me use some other color. But I must admit that I do kind of like them when applying color as is, and especially going for that one thick coat look. It is quite simple to just dip your brush in this little plastic half pipe and then dab it onto the wet palette before application. The youth version of me would really have liked this. Except of course in those colors information was kind of scarce and I had never heard of a wet palette. But I have also found out why they named them Toppler bottles. I said in part 1 that my friend spilled Nolan oil all over his keyboard, and it could not happen to me as it was all empty. Well, I was wrong. The Nolan oil might be empty, but I still had 3 more shades to go. And suddenly, a large portion of my desk was colored Reichland flesh. You see, not only have they made the bottles extra tall and fallable, if that's a word, they also added a safety catch, so that even if your hand missed the bottle itself, there's always the lid to catch your hand. And as always, when you put long things standing, you have to take the consequences. I always thought that there would be no further basing, but the flames breaking up the surface certainly did not look natural. But doing more advanced basing certainly would make them stand out to the brethren, so I compromised. A traditional white glue sand layer with extra fine sand was added. Extra fine might be a bit misleading here. The sand is still a regular sand stolen from the kids' sandbox, but I tried to get only the finer grains. It certainly helped the transition, but once again I was pushing the limit on how fancy things can get. So color-wise, I just primed it black and let it be. I still kind of like it. Once again, I'm not sure about the lore, but hanging out in that warp, it does not seem unlikely that you from time to time will walk around on pitch black ground. As this video draws to an end, I realize that this has been proper fun. I still have plenty of random bits left over, and I would not be surprised if there will be more of this, but I believe I can neatly sum up this challenge by returning to the naming. I could just have rolled off the tables, or selected the names I like, but why make things less complicated than they can be? And I have a cunning plan. Instead, I will be giving them ancient Egyptian names, and while reading up on this, I came across the habit of changing names of convicted criminals to something that would make your life a bit harder. And even though that minus guy did nothing wrong, these guys must have. Because let me introduce Vamukota Wakashem, or left-handed little fool. He got it because he has his staff in the opposite hand from the rest of the gang. Shigaru Mess, or born of a hound. Perhaps in Chaos this is a compliment, but my limited Egyptian got pretty hard pressed to produce 3 underperforming names. And then my favorite, Aku Nukuku, or Weary Rooster. What an insulting name for a rabid bird goat, man. The reason they changed names was that they believed that naming actually influenced your real life. And with this invisible curse, my friend will have no idea as to why they will always be underperforming. And as always, enjoy your hobby. I certainly have this time.